Welcome back to BYoungMinistry.com, to another blog and to another podcast. Today we continue in our study of Mark chapter 7. We're in verses 31 through 37, which reads, Then Jesus left the area around Tyre and went through Sidon to Lake Galilee, to the area of the 10 towns. While he was there, some people brought a man to him who was deaf and could not talk plainly. The people begged Jesus to put his hand on the man to heal him. Jesus led the man away from the crowd by himself. He put his fingers in the man's ears and then spit and touched the man's tongue. Looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to the man, Ephphatha. This means be opened. Instantly the man was able to hear and to use his tongue so that he spoke clearly. Jesus commanded the people not to tell anyone about what happened. But the more he commanded them, the more they told about it. They were completely amazed and said, Jesus does everything well. He makes the deaf hear, and those who can't talk, he makes them able to speak. That's Mark chapter 7, verses 31 through 37. Today we conclude our study of Mark chapter 7. The Lord Jesus began his earthly ministry in the northern region of Israel, and for well over a year he ministered in that region. As it is today, Galilee was a rural area, and the people are far more common and less educated. Before leaving that area for Jerusalem, the Lord Jesus traveled over the border to the north and west of Israel and entered into Gentile territory once again. His goal was the region known as the Decapolis, or the 12 towns. In verse 31 of today's passage we read, Then Jesus left the area around Tyre and went through Sidon to Lake Galilee, to the area of the 10 towns. The Decapolis, or the 10 Greek towns, was occupied by many Romans. As a result, the culture there was quite defined by the many Roman soldiers who were stationed there. Earlier, when Jesus was in that area, the people asked him to leave because they thought him to be a threat to their way of life. The Lord Jesus complied, but commanded a man, whom he delivered from a legion of demons, to tell others what the Lord had done for him. In Mark chapter 5, verses 17 through 20, we learned that when the Lord Jesus had returned to that eastern shore area, the locals brought to him a deaf-mute man, and they begged him to help the helpless man. This man is an illustration of all who out of our desperation have turned to the Lord. As a side note, Abraham, the first Jew, was a Gentile before he became a Jew. It was God's culture or definition of things that brought about the difference. In verses 32 through 34 of today's passage, we read, While he was there, some people brought a man to him who was deaf and could not talk plainly. The people begged Jesus to put his hand on the man to heal him. Jesus led the man away from the crowd by himself. He put his fingers in the man's ears and then spit and touched the man's tongue. Looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to the man, Ephphatha. This means be opened. The once skeptical people in the Decapolis brought this deaf and mute man to the Lord Jesus, who took him aside and healed him by placing his fingers in his ears. And after spitting, he touched the man's tongue. Since the man was deaf, he could not hear, but he could feel. The Lord put his fingers in this man's ears so that he could feel the touch of God, who was addressing his ear problem. And since speech is tied to our ability to hear, the Lord Jesus then touched the man's tongue. He spat and touched his tongue. To somebody who was so helpless, the touch of the Messiah was a great encouragement, and it bolstered his faith in the Lord Jesus. When the Lord saw the mute man's eyes and the look of faith in them, it was then the man was immediately healed. Faith is the required ingredient to receive anything from God. With the physical healing, the Lord Jesus awakened this man's faith and caused him to believe in him. Looking up to heaven, the Lord Jesus revealed the source of his power. God's power, when accessed, is always accessed through our submission to his will. The Lord Jesus spoke not to the man's ears, but to his heart. This is what he does for all of us. He speaks to our hearts. And he has been known to use some rather unusual means to make an audience of our hearts. Just after I graduated from high school, I didn't know God, so I didn't know how to listen to him or how to speak with him. As you know, in 1981, my father became very sick to the point of death. Just 3 days before his death, the Lord Jesus met me right where I was. As a result, I became a follower of Christ. Although my emotional blockages hindered my ability to understand, over time he communicated with me in a way that I could understand. Somehow he enabled me to know that his intentions for me were all good and that I could trust him. Like the deaf and mute man, I sensed his deep sigh on many occasions. He probed the deep places of my heart, where the pains of life had left many scars. He confronted that deep, searing pain that was in me due to losing both of my parents at a young age. He began his work of enabling my heart to see and hear him for myself. Strategically, he used my pain to enable my heart to recognize and to know him. In verses 35 through 37 of today's passage, we read, "Instantly the man was able to hear and to use his tongue so that he spoke clearly." Jesus commanded the people not to tell anyone about what had happened. But the more he commanded them, the more they told about it. They were completely amazed and said, "Jesus does everything well. He makes the deaf hear, and those who can't talk, he makes able to speak." The Lord Jesus, up to this point, had been dealing with the man as an individual. But now he suddenly speaks to the crowd and charges them to tell no one about the miracle. He did this, as on previous occasions, because the faith of this crowd and the faith of the man who was healed were on two different levels. The eyes of the man who was healed were fixed upon the God who acts. That is where faith must rest. So when this crowd, with its low level of understanding, started to disperse, the Lord Jesus charged them not to tell others. He did not say to the man not to tell others, for his eyes were fixed upon God, who is always ready to act in the lives whose faith is fixed on him. Both of these people in the latter half of Mark chapter 7 were Gentiles that the Lord Jesus went out of his way to meet. Like them, none of us have any right being offered his salvation and gaining eternal admission into heaven. None of us have any standing on our own before God. But just like this desperate woman and this helpless man, the Lord Jesus came looking for us to offer to us what we could not produce for ourselves. Have you entered into a personal relationship with the Lord? Have you heard his voice with your heart for yourself? Like the desperate woman and the helpless man, when we come to faith in him, we become living symbols of what the Lord can do in and through our willing hearts. This was not only what we needed, this is what this desperate world needs. Like you and me, they need His undying love to set them free. They need the Lord Jesus to open their ears and loosen their tongues. And once the Lord has done this work in our hearts, we are granted His heart to see them set free. My friends, I trust this blog and this podcast are helpful to you in your walk with the Lord. If I can be of further assistance to you, shoot me an email at BYoungMinistry@gmail.com. Hey, have a great